He says one thing, then another, and the story that follows becomes harder to trust. If you want verified updates on this case as they happen, hit subscribe and turn on the bell now. Fred Hill has become one of the most talked about names tied to the disappearance of Summer Wells. Over months and years, his public statements have cycled through vivid claims, contradictory versions, and moments of apparent bravado about what people will accept as truth. That pattern has pushed him to the center of online debate, and for good reason. When someone repeatedly offers specific allegations about where evidence can be found or who might be responsible, those words demand scrutiny. But scrutiny is not the same as acceptance. Responsible reporting separates what a person says from what independent verification confirms. In Summer Wells' case, Hill's claims, especially his recurring assertion that Summer was boxed and buried under another grave in Morrison Cemetery, are serious, testable, and fraught with consequence if they prove false. At the same time, the fact that two other individuals later repeated similar details raises a question investigators must take seriously. Is there a grain of truth buried among repeated falsehoods? Or is this simply the echo chamber at work, where a dramatic claim is amplified and picked up by others who then repeat it as if they'd known it themselves? Observers hear three patterns in Hill's public presence. First, specificity. He gives places, descriptive details, and sometimes names. Specificity is never neutral. It commands attention because it suggests anything from first-hand knowledge to plausible inference. Second, contradiction. His accounts change, sometimes in meaningful ways, and sometimes in ways that undercut earlier claims. Third, performative admission. On occasion he has said, in effect, that he could fabricate a story people would believe. That last element is perhaps the most damaging to his credibility. If a witness or tipster openly admits the capacity to invent information for attention, investigators have to treat everything he says as suspect until corroborated by independent evidence. Yet investigators must also keep an open ear. Unreliable sources sometimes reveal accurate fragments, whether through guilt, a desire to manipulate, or an unconscious need to unburden. The painstaking work of detectives is to find those fragments and test them, not to assume a person's honesty or guilt based solely on their temperament or social media persona. Why does Fred's voice land so heavily in public discourse? Part of the reason rests in the vacuum that surrounds the Summer Wells case. After intensive searches, thousands of tips, and years of public attention, the case has produced little in the way of physical evidence. When a case appears stalled, the public often gravitates toward new claims that look actionable, a cemetery name, a specific section, a marker to check. Those details are easily photographed, reshared, and discussed in the viral economy of modern true crime attention. The consequence, however, is twofold. If the claimed specifics are true and can be quickly verified, they offer a rare route to closure. If false, they distract investigators, re-traumatize the family, and can damage the reliability of genuinely useful community reporting in the future. That is why law enforcement's response tends to be careful and procedural. They cannot treat every viral claim as equivalent to an evidentiary lead without due process. Fred's statements should also be understood in the social context of modern content creation. He has been associated with people who document and discuss the case online, channels that gain viewers through dramatic statements and the promise of revelation. That connection means his words are more likely to travel quickly and widely. In a media ecosystem where engagement drives reach, a bold, unverified claim can attract immediate attention. This magnifies both the potential help and the potential harm the claim creates. For investigators, the presence of such a social media dynamic is a complicating factor. Tips that arrive through formal channels and are accompanied by verifiable records, timestamps, photos with metadata, eyewitness contact details, are easier to prioritize. Tips that circulate online without such documentation require different handling. They need verification without creating the kind of public pressure that pushes police into premature actions. Another layer complicating the public reaction is Fred's personal history. Media coverage and public records suggest he has had legal troubles in the past. Some of that material has circulated online and been highlighted by critics as evidence that his claims are not trustworthy. From a purely investigative standpoint, A person's criminal history is not dispositive of their truthfulness on any given point. People with problematic backgrounds sometimes provide crucial, truthful leads. Others use the media spotlight for attention or to manipulate narratives. Good investigators sort claims by verifiability, not by the moral profile of the claimant alone. The public, however, often lacks that nuance. To many viewers, criminal history is an immediate reason to discount a source. That instinct is understandable but incomplete. There's one more factor worth stressing: the emotional damage of false or unverified claims. For the Wells family, and for families in similar situations, each new, loud allegation is like reopening a wound. A claim that points to a burial can send family members through profound grief in minutes. Even when a public claim is made in the name of finding truth, it can function as a cruelty if it's untrue. For journalists and content creators, ethical considerations should weigh heavily in deciding what to amplify. For consumers of online material, the appropriate reaction is to demand verification before amplifying further. If you have first-hand, documented information, original photos with metadata, contemporaneous notes, a direct eyewitness willing to provide contact information, deliver it to law enforcement. That's the difference between a rumor and evidence. The pattern of repeated narratives, where a single sensational claim is echoed by others later, can have multiple explanations. It may mean independent witnesses saw the same thing. It may mean a small number of people sharing a narrative influenced others to adopt the same language. It may mean someone has fabricated a narrative that others repeat either deliberately or because they are convinced by persuasive rhetoric. Parsing that requires the basic tools of investigation: establishing timelines, testing the original source's location at the relevant time, examining whether the second and third sources had access to the original material, and checking for corroborating physical or digital records. From a public safety perspective, how should authorities respond? The ideal sequence is clear and constrained by law and evidence practice. 1. Collect the tip and log the details. 2. Verify the credibility of the source to the extent possible using background checks and corroborating statements. 3. Seek non-invasive checks such as cemetery records, plot purchase histories, and ground-penetrating radar if legal authority and probable cause justify it. 4. Use cadaver dogs or other forensic tools where appropriate. And 5. If multiple independent indicators suggest disturbance, secure a warrant and conduct a forensic excavation under controlled conditions. Each of those steps must be documented meticulously so that any evidence obtained holds up in court. That process is slow and appears opaque to the public, but it's designed to protect both the integrity of the investigation and the rights of individuals. The social fallout is immediate and harmful in predictable ways. Once Hill's video circulated, dozens of channels re-uploaded clips, threads formed analyzing his tone, and followers debated motive and veracity. Some viewers were moved to drive to Morrison's cemetery themselves, hoping to see evidence or to be part of a grassroots search. That urge, while human, carries real risks. Untrained people trampling grave markers, digging on private property, or contaminating soil can erase forensic traces that might otherwise be decisive. When a case is already fragile on evidence, civilian interference can do permanent damage. At the same time, there is a persistent, uncomfortable reality. People who have been dishonest in other matters sometimes include accurate facts in their stories. Motives vary: guilt, attention, bargaining, or a complicated mix, and liars do not always lie across the board. Investigators are trained to treat suspicious sources as possible gateways to truth, not simply to be dismissed. That is why law enforcement quietly follows leads even from unreliable narrators. A single verified fact can open a series of corroborations that reconstruct events. The process is painstaking and slow. It is also the only way to build a case that holds up in court. One of the most important pieces of this is how authorities validate a cemetery claim. The first step is non-invasive. Check cemetery management records and burial logs. Who purchased the plots? When were they used? Are there recent interments? Next comes careful, supervised surveying, groundskeepers, historical lot maps, and non-destructive scanning such as ground-penetrating radar can reveal disturbances beneath the surface without immediate digging. Cadaver dogs can provide probable cause in some cases, but their alerts are just one component of the evidentiary chain. If multiple independent indicators converge, records, radar anomalies, canine alerts, the next step is legal. Investigators obtain the authority to excavate under forensic conditions. If remains are recovered, labs will test DNA and other materials to establish identity and cause. All of these steps are deliberate, documented, and legally constrained. Given that framework, it is understandable that the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and local law enforcement have been careful in public statements. Saying significant items were recovered after a raid, or that items of interest were taken from a location, is a carefully measured choice of words. It signals that something was found worth preserving, testing, or analyzing without presupposing what those items mean. For a family that has waited years, such measured language may feel evasive. But from an investigative standpoint, it protects the integrity of the evidence chain. Another layer is Hill's personal history and relationships. Public records and social reporting indicate he has had brushes with the law in the past. Again, a criminal record does not prove culpability here, but it does affect how the community hears his claims. It influences the initial lens of suspicion and the way crowdsourced detectives parse his statements online. Moreover, Hill's association with a content creator who has amplified the case places him in a media ecosystem where influence and narrative power matter. That dynamic can make it hard for officials to separate authentic tips from those intended to generate clicks or fund a platform. This leads to a broader caution. Social media can both help and harm investigations. On the positive side, a widely shared post can reach someone who saw something years ago and felt comfortable coming forward. That has solved cases countless times. On the negative side, viral tips can encourage spectacle, erode confidentiality, and seed false memories. Observers are vulnerable to confirmation bias. They latch onto details that fit a narrative, and sometimes people retroactively reconstruct memories to match viral claims. Experienced investigators account for this by documenting original statements, checking metadata, and seeking independent corroboration. So what should a responsible viewer do? If you have verifiable, first-hand information, a dated photo with metadata, a contemporaneous observation tied to a time and place, a license plate number, or any physical evidence, give it directly to investigators through official channels. Don't dig. Don't move things. Don't broadcast unverified claims that can cause collateral damage. If you're local, contact the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation or the Rogersville/Hawkins County Sheriff's Office with documented information. If you're not local but have something that seems relevant, email or call with records and timestamps. The best tip is one that's verifiable and specific. It's also worth noting the human fallout. For the Wells family, each new rumor is another wound. False leads rise and fall like tides. Each surge pushes grief back onto the shore. Families facing public speculation live under relentless scrutiny, and misinformation amplifies pain. Responsible reporting and restrained public engagement matter as much as forensic rigor. The eventual resolution, whatever it looks like, must be built on documented evidence and careful procedure, not on the loudest social clip or the most widely shared claim. Fred Hill's statements reshaped attention simply because they point to a place, which makes them inherently testable. Whether they will yield truth or remain another painful detour depends on the rigorous steps that follow: records checks, non-invasive scans, canine work, legal authorization, and, if warranted, a forensic excavation. That's slow and imperfect, but it's the path that produces answers that stick. This case sits at the intersection of grief, rumor, law, and technology. It shows how a single claim can mobilize tens of thousands of people online and reinvigorate investigations, for better or worse. It also demonstrates why investigators prefer process over headlines, because the consequences of a premature announcement are real and often irreversible. Fred Hill's shifting narrative has consequences beyond just fevered online debate. It shapes the investigatory workload, influences public sentiment, and can either create momentum toward a verifiable lead or drain resources with false trails. Right now, the responsible stance for those following the story is to treat Hill's statements as claims, potentially significant, certainly disturbing, but not as proof. If law enforcement finds corroboration, it will be through those measured, documented investigative steps. Until then, the most constructive role for the public is to withhold amplification until verification, and to pass any concrete, verifiable information to authorities rather than to social feeds. In the end, the uncomfortable truth is this: unreliable narrators sometimes hold kernels of real information, and reliable-sounding witnesses sometimes lie. The job of justice, whether carried out by detectives or by the broader community contributing responsibly, is to turn claim into corroboration, rumor into evidence. Fred Hill's stories may contain fragments of truth, or they may be skillful constructions of falsehood. Either way, they are now part of the record and must be tested with the tools of forensics, good policing, and careful journalism. We will keep following only verified developments and avoid amplifying claims until they are supported by evidence. If you have something specific and verifiable, pass it to authorities. If you're watching from afar, share responsibly, and don't try to become a substitute for trained investigators. And if you want an accountable source for updates that rely on confirmed facts, subscribe and toggle the bell, because in cases like this, patience, method, and proof are the only reliable routes to justice.